Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon, and today I'm joined by Chris Yadon, Managing Director of Saprea, a nonprofit committed to liberating individuals and society from child sexual abuse through healing and prevention. As Saprea's first employee, Chris helped launch the organization in 2015 and now leads its efforts to drive broad societal change on this critical issue. With a background in executive leadership across tech and healthcare, Chris brings both strategic insight and deep compassion to his work. He's also a sought-after speaker on topics like emotional healing, prevention in a hypersexualized world, and the power of community-driven change. We're excited to welcome Chris to the show today to explore how Saprea is confronting the silent epidemic of child sexual abuse through healing programs for adult survivors, prevention tools for families, and a collective call to break the silence, build resilience, and create a safer, more compassionate world for every child. Chris, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Hey, it's great to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with Saprea, can you tell us what it is and what your team does to work with survivors of child sexual abuse?
Yeah, so at Saprea, we liberate individuals in society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. When I say liberate individuals, what that means is we focus on healing programs and services for adult survivors of child sexual abuse. When I talk about liberating society, that's where we focus more on our prevention work, so empowering parents and other primary caregivers to reduce risk of child sexual abuse for their children, as well as the broad societal awareness around the issue of child sexual abuse.
Awesome. And I really like the terms that you use, liberating the community and healing programs. And so I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but I always want to know how people got into the type of work that they do. So can you share what personally led you to this type of work and how your own story or maybe even some family experiences shaped your passion for confronting child sexual abuse?
Yeah, I mean, as it goes, those of us that end up doing this type of work, you look back and you see all the roads bringing you here, but you don't necessarily see them as they happen. So for me, it really goes back to when I was a kid. I grew up next to an orchard. It was Grandpa's orchard. And I'd spend a lot of time out there. If you can imagine a little kid, barefoot, bare chested, just kind of rolling around, really having maybe that sense of idealism growing up without a care in the world, latchkey kid. And that wasn't really the reality, but that's how I perceived my childhood. There were some troubles at home of various types, but it wasn't until I was a young adult that I started to learn about how child sexual abuse had impacted my family specifically. And fortunately, it didn't happen inside the family. Not that it's much better coming from outside, but it came from outside the family in our case. And I remember feeling really, really angry in that moment, mostly because as I saw my loved ones who had experienced child sexual abuse try to deal with it, they were really struggling, and there's a lot of shame and stigma. The world basically sent the message, this is too taboo. There wasn't good services on how the family should deal with it. Yeah. So it didn't really get dealt with in a healthy way. And seeing that impact just really made me upset. So as time went on and my career kind of wove back into the social sector, I had the opportunity to come start at Saprea with our founders and do something about it. And as it goes, when anger is properly channeled, it often turns into activism. And so it was really easy for me to want to get involved. So that's a really short version of a very long story of how those roads led me here, but I'm sure grateful they did.
Absolutely. And it is just the point. It is kind of funny that as we get to be adults and do our careers, it does generally tie back to something that happened in our childhood. It's kind of funny how that works. But Saprea, it really does focus heavily on adult survivors. And as a social worker, I've worked, in multiple areas, child protective services, working in this public school system. So I've seen the children's version of child sexual abuse, but not necessarily how to assist and how to heal adult survivors. So this is a group that's often overlooked. Why is this population so important to your mission, and what types of healing tools do you guys provide?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up such critical points. First of all, they are overlooked. Adult survivors of child sexual abuse are overlooked. And what happens is most survivors of child sexual abuse do not disclose during childhood. So some of the groups you worked with, whether it was a school system or CPS, they don't even get the opportunity to help
Right. Yeah.
most survivors because most survivors don't disclose. And there's lots of reasons for that. So you have this enormous population of people that experienced harm, and they've had to kind of go it on their own. And as it goes, if trauma is unresolved and continues to work its way through someone's life, they can develop symptoms, most commonly post-traumatic stress symptoms. So you have this large population of adults that are dealing with post-traumatic stress symptoms. They may not even connect those back to their childhood sexual abuse. They just know that they're dealing with hardships during life. So it was a population that needed a lot of help, mainly because there wasn't much for them outside of individual therapy. And we are huge advocates of individual therapy, but trauma and child sexual abuse specifically, it really needs additional resources that wrap around that individual therapeutic experience. So you have their individual therapy. They need the community-based work. They need the mindfulness work. They need the body work that comes along with addressing trauma. So we saw that need and we said, that's something we can do. We can go build wraparound healing services that augment that individual therapy experience. Or even in some cases for survivors that may have more mild symptoms, it may be what they need. So that's really the niche that we sought to meet. So we do that through 4 healing programs. And I won't go into a lot of detail quite yet, but at a high level, we do 4. The first one is a 4-day in-person retreat program, heavy on psychoeducation, where they're learning how trauma impacts the brain and the body, how their nervous system responds, what are the symptoms. So we do a lot of psychoeducation there. We do a lot of experiential learning where they get exposed to different ways that they can engage in healing. And we work diligently to build community with other survivors. For many of them, it's the first time they've ever met, well, not actually met somebody, but known that they met somebody that was a survivor of child sexual abuse. So it really normalizes that experience for them and helps them not feel so alone. So that experience is tremendously helpful. Similarly, we try to achieve the same goals through 3 other experiences. So we have peer-led, peer-run support groups. So by survivors, for survivors, 27 weeks of curriculum that they can go through as a support group in person or virtually or hybrid. We also have a half-day workshop where survivors can kind of dip their toe in the water and learn about trauma and how trauma impacts, specifically child sexual abuse trauma impacts the brain and body. And then lastly, we have 17 symptom-based modules. So a survivor can go look by symptom they're experiencing. And this is all on our website and receive both education and resources very specific to that symptom. And for our clinicians in the audience, we've actually had more and more high number of clinicians that are using that particular service in their treatment planning because they're high quality resources that are symptom based that can be very narrowly focused for how their client may be presenting. So that's how we address it.
Very nice. I like that there's some diversity in how the programs can be accessed. I know you guys are in Utah. And so for us that are in different parts of the country, I wondered when you first started talking, like, how can we connect clients, patients to this level of work? Because again, I haven't, seen it addressed with adults. And so I can really appreciate that there is that online component for, clinicians to use, for survivors to use as well. One of the quotes that I saw is that trauma happens in isolation, but healing has to happen in a community type of
Yeah.
setting. So I can really appreciate that you guys' retreats and support groups really provide a community for folks that don't necessarily know that they even needed one.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And when we look at the research, we've been researching since 2018 our programs pretty extensively. Community is all our participants cite as the most instrumental part of the intervention for them. So when we talk about post-traumatic stress symptom reduction or coping efficacy improvement for these clients, when we ask them why have things changed for you,
Mhm.
and almost always cite their communities. And each of these cohorts, we've now had over 6,000 women from all 50 states and 12 countries come through that retreat program. And the half day workshop, they've come from 42 countries. And when we kind of say, what's the difference? What's making a change for you? It's the community they build with these other survivors, and they stay in contact with them long after our part of the intervention, and they support one another
That's awesome.
actively in their healing journeys.
That is awesome. That's awesome to hear. So I know you guys also work not just in the healing side, you also do a lot of prevention work as well. So Chris, I have two sons, 11 and 5. And so we are getting to the age where we are seeing things, people's families have different things, and they're going to other people's houses for stuff, and I cannot protect them. So from the parent side of this, I know a lot of parents have this mindset that this can never happen to my child. I'm doing everything and they're just going to be great. How, one, do we overcome that? And then also, as a parent, how do we educate ourselves to be able to have those conversations with our children?
Yeah, so let me first address kind of the perception you talked about, and then we'll talk about how do we tackle it. So the perception of, yeah, I feel pretty safe in my community, my neighborhood, my school, whatever it might be. I don't think it's going to happen here, is really, really common.
Yeah.
And it's that perception is reinforced because by the stigma associated with child sexual abuse, that when it does occur, people rarely talk about it, even people that are close to us.
Mhm.
So there's a principle, and this is a really important principle to social movements in general, but child sexual abuse specifically, referred to as proximity. And this is where it's really important in any type of movement to break down those stigmas and have people with lived experience share their stories. That's the quickest way to erode at a perception that isn't actually true. So if we go to the actual statistics, and these aren't cherry picked, these are well researched, well vetted over many years. 1 in 8 children in the United States will be sexually abused by age 18. So when you think about 1 in 8, you can't otherize the issue. You can't say, oh, that's some other children, some other community. It happens in every community, rich, poor, faith communities, non-faith communities. It just doesn't matter. It happens everywhere. And certainly some groups are more disproportionately affected by others, but we should not think this is an other problem. This is not an inner city problem or a rural problem. This is not a problem with people of color only. This is a problem for all races and ethnicities. It is happening everywhere. So that issue of proximity, what it does is when people start sharing their stories, it actually brings the issue close to home. So let me just share my experience. When I first started working in the social sector, I knew about some people that had experienced it. But when I specifically started working in child sexual abuse, I had people I'd known 10 years, 15 years, 25 years disclose that they were survivors. These were people that were close to me, people I considered to be some of the closest people in my life. Yet it's so stigmatized, they didn't share with me. That's when those stats became alive for me. And this is true of anybody that really engages around this issue. Immediately you'll have people in your close circle start disclosing, and it will feel proximate. And then you can no longer otherize this issue. So that's kind of the perception issue. The second part of your question you asked is, what do we do for parents and caregivers? it is all about risk reduction, not risk elimination. To eliminate risk, we will cause other harm to our kids. We would have to wrap them in bubble wrap, be with them every second of every day. And that has its own drawbacks and harm associated with it. So it's not about paranoia. That's not what prevention is about. It's about awareness, education around what the risks are, and being intentional about reducing those risks for your kids so that they can have a healthy, happy, full of life upbringing where you behind the scenes are intervening to reduce some of these risks for them.
Got you. Got you. And so digging a little bit deeper into that piece, for me, trying to have the conversation it's the hardest of the stuff. I probably could come up with all great things to say, but just kind of overcoming that awkwardness to start those conversations. Does Saprea have any tools to help parents with that? And what does that look like?
We do, kind of. We have some great tools. But overcoming the awkwardness, we also have a saying, embrace the awkwardness. Because even with great tools, it's still going to be there. And so it's one of those things where, we as adults, we just have to be the adults and we have to say, hey, this is awkward and it's part of the deal. And I'm going to embrace it and do it anyway, because it's worth it to protect my kids. So the tools won't eliminate the awkwardness, but let me give you an example of one tool. One of the ways we can reduce risks is having age-appropriate sexual health discussions with our kids. One of the biggest reasons that kids don't disclose unhealthy behaviors, say grooming behaviors or patterns, is they don't have words for it. They don't know how to describe it. They don't know what's normal, what's abnormal. In fact, many survivors of child sexual abuse don't even recognize it was sexual abuse until they get older. They just thought that was what happened. That was part of life. And so when parents or other caregivers have those sexual health discussions with their kids, it helps the child in an age-appropriate way know, what's normal, what's healthy, what's unhealthy. What do I need to talk to mom or dad or grandpa about or grandma about? What do I need to disclose? When do I need to raise a flag that something's happening? So that's one of our tools. We give you by age and typical development stages, what are the most common conversations you should have at each age? So your 11-year-old, there's a section for that age group. Like, what are the conversations that you're having with an 11-year-old? And that's an example of one of the tools we provide right on the website. They're all free and available right from our website.
Nice, nice. And in your experience, when should those conversations start? How often should they be? Like, what is kind of the standard and the best practices where that's concerned?
Yeah, so we start from infancy. So let me give you an example. My daughter, when she was a toddler, she was probably around 2 years old. So think really young age. We were already teaching her about bodily autonomy. Right? Which is a really important principle around this topic. So she stepped up on the counter one day and was up there, and we're like, hey, you need to get down. We don't want you to fall. And she's like, no. It was her mom that was saying this. She said, yeah, you need to get down. She's like, no. Third time she said, you need to get down. She said, no, it's my body and I get to choose. So you think even at that young age as a toddler, barely being able to communicate and talk and getting out the words as a toddler would, she was grasping even those basic concepts around bodily autonomy and boundaries and her voice. Sometimes I wonder if we've given her voice a little too much power. But hey, we'll deal with the challenges of that. Absolutely. As a trade-off for empowering her to be safer.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So speaking of youth, in my experience as well, LGBTQ questioning youth are significantly more at risk for sexual abuse. Why is that? Like, what do we know about that? And how can families, educators, and communities better protect and support queer youth?
Yeah. So there's some things we know from the research. There's a lot we don't, where we can have some theories. So here's what we know. LGBTQIA youth are nearly 4 times more likely than their peers to experience child sexual abuse. So that's something we know. Second thing that we know is girls specifically in this demographic are 3 times more likely to experience unwanted sexual advances online than heterosexual girls, and boys nearly 8 times more than heterosexual boys. So out of this, there are some prevailing theories of why LGBTQIA youth experience sexual abuse more. And the most dominant theory is because in their family, it either may be stigmatized or not normalized, or even if it is normalized, the parent may not be able to have a grasp of what they're experiencing. A lot of LGBTQIA youth go online for sexual education. And as we know, if you're going online for sexual education, it's really easy to find yourself in all sorts of places that are not only not helpful, but even predatory.
Yeah.
So because of this, we think that there's a much higher risk that they're being engaged by predatory behavior or being exposed to predatory behavior than their peers. So that's one of the predominant working theories as to why the rates may be higher. I'm sure there are other reasons that we have yet to discover, but those are some of them.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first-time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
Gotcha. And how would you suggest to families, educators, even communities at large, how can we better support and protect our youth?
Yeah, I mean, talking about LGBTQIA youth specifically, just to kind of finish that, I'd say it's in the best interest of the parent to resource around sexual health specifically. And that can be you getting educated and being that resource. It can be you bringing in someone trusted to help with that. I know, for example, in our local area, there's a great nonprofit that is exceptional in working with the family for these very types of reasons and issues to help reduce risk for LGBTQIA youth. I mean, more generally to the entire population of youth, how do we engage? We encourage parents to learn the top 5 ways to reduce risk. And those are all available on our website. I won't go into all 5 now because they each require an explanation, but I'll just give you one example. One of the example at the top 5 is teaching our children how to set, hold, and respect boundaries. So if we look at just that one, when a child's being abused, there's almost always a power differential. If they don't understand what a boundary is, they're less likely to raise their hand to their parents saying, someone's doing something I'm not comfortable with, which allows the parent to intervene early. Or it allows the child, depending on the child, to set their own boundary. Perpetrators don't like risk. So even mild boundaries set by children, a perpetrator will often move on because they see it as a high risk situation for them. So just that one thing. And then we talk about respecting boundaries. If we look at half of the issue of child sexual abuse is minors on other minors. But if we look really narrowly at the ages of 14 to 17, it goes as high as 70% of abuse during that time period, those teenage years, is minor on minor. So in that case, it's about setting, holding, and respecting boundaries with our peers. And it's as much for, like me as a parent, to help my kids know how to set and hold boundaries as it is to teach them to respect boundaries, because I don't want them to harm other kids sexually. Right. Just as much as I don't want them to be harmed. So we have to look at it from both sides.
Gotcha. Okay. So just in my experience working with adults who, have or are survivors of sexual abuse when they were younger, it generally is folks that may have been incarcerated, women of color, maybe even those with disabilities. They're all just groups in general that, have elevated risk of trauma in general, but most definitely child sexual abuse as well. In your experience, what types of patterns are you guys seeing across these communities? And then how are you tailoring healing programs to meet those unique needs?
Yeah. So let's talk about disabilities first. Children with disabilities are about 3 times more likely to experience sexual abuse,
Mhm.
especially those that have communication disabilities
Yeah.
are at higher risk. When we look at, I'll just say racial minorities in the US, the CDC in 2023 did a report that said racial minorities experience higher rates of child sexual abuse than the national average. So they're a couple percentage higher. When we look at specific races or ethnicities, that ranges a little bit. So, as an example, if we looked at American Indian or Alaska Native, 18.8% of that particular group is at risk of child sexual abuse by age 18. So, now to your question, how do we intervene or what do we do with these populations that may be at higher risk? Saprea's approach is to recognize cultural competency and to work through partners for that cultural competency. So we have a lot of things that are self-service. If they want to come to the retreat, come regardless of race or ethnicity, or if they want to engage in our workshop, come. But we also simultaneously work through community leaders that have the cultural competency that we may not have. So one example would be our Hispanic or Latino community. Second generation, they come and participate in our resources broadly. But when we look at first generation, that first generation that immigrated here, they're really hesitant to engage in our services. So we've worked with community leaders to help us know where we should meet them. And those community leaders have given us guidance on which of our programs are most appropriate. And we've emphasized those programs to those specific communities. In the case of the Hispanic or Latino community, the healing workshop giving virtually was something that worked and that they felt safe in. So that's where we met them. So it's about meeting them where they're at, using those in the community that have the competency to help us know where that should be.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to kind of go back just a little bit and talk about the survivors themselves. You mentioned that symptoms may come through looking similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. I want to talk a minute about what those symptoms look like. So you mentioned that a lot of people we don't discuss it. It's not like something we talk about. And so I'm curious if there are things that us as practitioners that may be listening in, certain, characteristics that we may see in our clients or our patients or even family members that may shed some light on what someone has experienced as a child.
Yeah, such a big question. And I'm going to use a couple examples, but I'm really going to
Okay.
direct the listeners to our website because there's 17 of them and we probably can't discuss all 17. So I'll just choose one or two to answer the question. So I'll choose emotional numbness as an example. Emotional numbing is a post-traumatic stress symptom. It's also a symptom of other things. So emotional numbness often shows up in a few different ways in survivors. So one of them is hyperproductivity. So if I stay ultra productive, I don't have to sit with my thoughts and feelings. It's a way I can numb my feelings.
Mhm.
And it's the way I can numb my emotions. So you'll see a lot of survivors that are very, very accomplished and they are go, 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 go all the time. And they use that to not deal with their thoughts or feelings to be able to keep them at bay or to keep them numb. So that would be one example of how it shows up. Another way emotional numbness shows up is through substances, and they will use substances to blunt the emotion. That one's a little more obvious, right? And
Yeah.
most practitioners are well aware that substance use is almost always a secondary issue. There's almost always something underneath that those substances are masking. Another example would be sexual intimacy issues, problems either with hypersexuality or hyposexuality, where they're kind of on ends of the spectrum and their sexual experiences either activated or shut down as a result of their trauma. So I think I would really just encourage practitioners that are listening to just spend some time on our website to make these connections. because it's going to be pretty challenging in a few minutes on a podcast to even connect one of them deeply to the issue of child sexual abuse. But that's what this exact spot on the website's for.
Awesome. Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did want to make sure that we shed some light on the powerful tools that are listed on your website, because as I took a moment to look through it, it was so much that the moment wasn't good enough. I needed to spend and will spend more time digging through each section of the website, because not only does it give, just that basic psychoeducational information, there are so many other sections and different pieces, tools that folks can use in practical ways. And so I'm glad that we were able to just kind of have a moment to discuss just a few of the things that are listed there on your website.
No question. And like I mentioned earlier, all the resources are free too. As a nonprofit with generous donors, we've worked hard to keep these free. We're going to continue to work hard to keep them free. And we would love for practitioners and individuals to use them as they see fit.
Awesome. And speaking of the website and just the social presence that many organizations have these days, not too long ago, I had a conversation with the folks from Love 146, which is a similar organization, but they work to end child sex trafficking or child trafficking, period. And so I'm wondering if there's a role for collective action. Is there a way for, or are organizations already working together to solve some of these issues and again work to prevent some things from happening?
Yeah, not only is there room for it, it's actually a requirement of actually moving the needle. So when we look at social change and societal change theory, and then underneath that, something called social movement theory, we learn that no significant change has happened, social change has happened in our society by a single individual or a single organization. Mm-hmm. You have to come together and work collectively. In fact, you mentioned Love 146. They happen to be a group that work with Prevent Together, a national coalition to prevent child sexual abuse and exploitation. We're also on that coalition. So even that exact example is an example of us coming to work together collaboratively to address sexual violence. So organizations have to work together. You have to have an abundance mentality. You have to find common ground of things that you can collaborate on and focus on and narrowly engage in with one another. That's the only way change will happen. Any of these social organizations that say, I have the solution and it's my solution and this is the way and everybody needs to get behind it, will never create the change necessary to move the needle. It just doesn't work that way. History has taught us over and over again that the collective action, collective impact that comes from that collective action is the only way to actually move the needle on society.
I completely agree with you. And I would be remiss, and I hate that I didn't bring this up sooner. I just kind of caught the dates. I mentioned in the intro that Saprea was created in 2015 and it is now 2025. So congratulations on 10 years. That is amazing. Thank you for your work to the community.
Hey, thank you. It's a big milestone. We sit in that really uncomfortable place of being really pleased with what's happened, but not satisfied. Yeah. And we've got to be able to hold both of those at the same time. Some great things have happened, but we've got a long ways to go.
Absolutely. And so speaking of that, what is next?
It's all about scaling right now for us. That's what we're focused on. So in our first 10 years, between our prevention and healing programs, we had 30,472 people in seats participating in programming. So that's what happened in the first 10 years. Yeah. For us to accomplish our goals, that just over 30,000 needs to turn into hundreds of thousands, into millions. And so that's what we're focused on right now, is scaling. And I'll share a really cool story. You brought up individuals who are incarcerated earlier as a vulnerable population. So this is an example of how we're scaling. So we partnered with a group. So note that collective impact partnership, right? Mm-hmm. We partnered with a group called Adovo, who has tablets in prison and jail systems all across the country. I think they're up to a little over 1,100 prison and jail systems all across the country, all 50 states. So we partnered with them and we took our healing workshop and turned it into 10 self-service modules that women who are experiencing incarceration can do on these tablets through a learning management system. So we launched that in December of last year. So we're what now, 7 months in, a little over 7 months in.
Mm-hmm.
In the first 7 months, we've already, so keep in mind how many we had in our first 10 years, a little over 30,000.
Mhm.
In our first 7 months alone, we've already had 12,811 women complete all 10 modules. So when we talk about scaling, this is what we're talking about. It's like, how do we take what works? We've spent the first 10 years getting our programming right, getting it researched, making sure it's working. Now, how do we get it out to the masses? And partnerships and collaborative work, like our partnership with Adovo, is a great example of how that happens. I mentioned the 12,000 that have done all 10 modules. We have 26,591 that have done at least one module.
Wow.
So that's how you scale. That's how we plan to scale, is through partnerships. So, organizations that are listening to this, there are some out there that I'm sure we should partner with that have large audiences, and in those audiences are survivors of child sexual abuse. Those are the type of partners that we're looking for to get our programs and services out to them in a way that's meaningful, that helps them fulfill their mission and helps us fulfill ours, for mutual benefit, and ultimately for the mutual benefit of the survivors that are looking for these services.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And so then for our listeners who want to learn more or get involved, whether they're survivors, parents, just simply concerned community members, where should they begin and how can they support Saprea's mission?
Yeah. So Saprea.org is the easiest way. There's lots of ways you can get involved there, anywhere from donating financially to volunteering to partnering, right? Those are the easiest ways to do it. I also encourage people, if they specifically want to raise awareness, need a voice at their conference or on a podcast like this, or what have you, that's where I spend my personal time. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Substack. I do some writing there. I personally speak a lot about emotional numbing, that side of it. I'm not a survivor of child sexual abuse, but through my own challenges and growing up, I did learn to emotionally numb and have learned how to feel again. So, have a common experience with survivors in that area. So I speak a lot about that. So raising awareness, going to our site, donating, or partnering or volunteering, those are the best ways to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Chris, I have really appreciated you speaking with us today.
Thanks. It's been awesome to be with you, and really appreciate you sharing your mic in helping raise awareness around child sexual abuse. It's a big deal to us, and hopefully it will be a benefit to those that listen.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and more. We're even on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, make sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review. That helps our show get discovered and share the valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.